I folded the letter twice, set it down on the kitchen table beside my half-finished cup of coffee, and sat there for a long time watching the snow come down outside the window. My name is Kenneth Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Barrie, Ontario, that I've owned for 31 years. And what you're about to hear is the story of how my daughter tried to take everything I had built, and how I made sure she understood very clearly that she had made a serious mistake. I need to go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My wife Carol passed away in the winter of 2009. Pancreatic cancer. She was 52 years old, and she was gone in 4 months from the day they told us. My daughter was 19 at the time, and my son-in-law, well, he wasn't in the picture yet. It was just the two of us, my daughter and me, in this house, trying to figure out how to keep going. Her name is Amber. She was always the sharp one. Quick with words, quick with numbers, quick with an argument. Even as a child, she could negotiate her way out of anything. I used to laugh about it. I used to tell Carol that Amber was going to be a lawyer or a politician, and Carol would shake her head and say she was going to be trouble. We meant it with love, both of us. She was our only child, and we adored her. After Carol died, I threw myself into work. I was a project manager for a civil engineering firm in Barrie, and I had enough seniority by then that I could keep my head down and my schedule full. I drove Amber to university in Guelph that September, helped her move into residence, and cried the whole 2 hours back on the 400. I don't know that I've admitted that to anyone before. I paid her tuition, all 4 years. I also sent her $800 a month for living expenses because I knew what student debt did to young people, and I didn't want that for her. I did the same thing my father had done for me, more or less, and I considered it the right thing to do. She graduated in 2012 with a degree in business administration. I drove back to Guelph for the ceremony and took her out for dinner at a nice restaurant on the edge of town. She ordered the rack of lamb and a bottle of wine for the table and told me about a job offer she'd received in Toronto. I told her I was proud of her. I meant it. She met her husband, Derek. She met the man she would marry 2 years later. I'm going to call him by his role here because, frankly, it's what he became to me in the end. Her husband. A sales manager for a software company in Mississauga. He was confident, well-dressed, drove a leased BMW, and looked at my daughter like she'd hung the moon. I liked him well enough at first. He shook my hand firmly and called me sir, and I thought, well, that's a decent start. They got married in 2015. I contributed $30,000 to the wedding at their request. The venue was a restored barn outside of Caledon, and it was beautiful. Carol would have loved it. I stood at the back during the reception for a while, next to a hydrangea arrangement the size of a small car, and I thought about how much I missed her. In 2017, they bought a house in Oakville. I helped with the down payment, $50,000, transferred directly to the real estate lawyer's trust account. I didn't think of it as a loan. I thought of it as a gift from a father to his daughter. I thought of it as what Carol would have wanted. In 2018, my granddaughter was born. They named her Emma. I drove down to the hospital in Burlington and sat in the waiting room for 5 hours until they let me in. And when I held her for the first time, I understood completely why people say certain moments change you. She was 8 pounds 4 ounces, and she had Carol's nose, and I fell in love immediately. I drove to Oakville every 2 weeks after that. I brought groceries. I assembled furniture. I babysat so my daughter and her husband could go to dinner or to the gym or simply sleep uninterrupted. I was retired by then. I'd taken early retirement at 63, partly because my knees were giving me trouble, and partly because I had enough set aside between my pension, my RRSP, and the equity in my house that I didn't need to keep working. I thought having more time meant I could be more useful to them. I thought that was what family meant. Last March, on a Thursday morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. I recognized my daughter's handwriting on the front. I assumed it was a card. Easter was coming, and I brought it inside and opened it with my coffee. It was not a card. It was a typed letter, 4 pages, and it had been reviewed by a lawyer. I could tell by the language. The first paragraph informed me that my daughter and her husband had been discussing my long-term care situation and had concluded that my current living arrangement was no longer sustainable or advisable given my age and the increasing burden on the family. The second paragraph outlined a plan. They had identified a retirement residence in Innisfail, 40 minutes north of Barrie. They wanted me to sell my house, use the proceeds to fund a private room at this facility, and transfer any remaining assets into a family trust, which they would administer. The third paragraph was the one that stayed with me. It said, and I am paraphrasing because I don't want to give those words more space than they deserve, that I should not expect them to rearrange their lives around my needs, that they had a daughter to raise and careers to maintain, and a household of their own to manage, that the most loving thing I could do for everyone, including myself, was to accept this plan gracefully and transition to a setting where professional care was available. I was 67 years old. I walked 2 kilometers every morning. I cook my own meals. I drive myself to my doctor's appointments and my curling league on Wednesday evenings and my woodworking class at the community center on Saturdays. I had my last physical 8 months ago, and my doctor told me I was in excellent health for my age and to keep doing what I was doing. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it, put it in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus, and called my friend Bernard. Bernard had been my closest friend for 22 years. We'd worked together, golfed together, and when Carol was sick, he'd shown up at my house every Sunday with a pot of soup and didn't ask any questions. He was a retired accountant and one of the clearest-headed people I'd ever known. I told him what the letter said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Ken, you need to call a lawyer before you do anything else." I called a lawyer the next morning. Her name was Vanessa Okafor. She practiced estate and family law out of an office on Dunlop Street, and she had been recommended to me by my financial advisor the year before in an entirely different context. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Whitmore, do you have a current will?" I did. I'd written it in 2010, the year after Carol died. It left everything to Amber, with a small bequest to my brother in Halifax. And who is the executor? Also Amber. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said very calmly, "I think we have some work to do." We met 3 times over the following 2 weeks. In those meetings, I learned several things I had not known or had not thought carefully enough about. I learned that my house, which I owned outright with no mortgage, was now valued at approximately $840,000. I learned that my RRSP and TFSA accounts, combined with my defined benefit pension from my years with the engineering firm, put me in a genuinely comfortable position. I was not wealthy by any stretch, but I was stable and I was independent, and I did not need anyone to manage my affairs. I also learned that the family trust my daughter had proposed would, in practical terms, give her and her husband effective control over my assets while I was still alive. The retirement residence they had chosen cost $9,000 a month for a private room. My house, once sold, would cover roughly 8 years of that cost, and after that, I would have nothing left, nothing to leave to Emma. Nothing to protect my own interests if my health changed. Nothing. Was I really going to let that happen? Was I really going to sign over the life I had built, the house Carol and I had chosen together, the savings I had kept careful watch over for decades, because my daughter had mailed me a 4-page letter written in lawyer language? I sat in Vanessa's office on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and I made 3 decisions. The first was to update my will. Amber was removed as primary beneficiary and executor. In her place, I named my brother in Halifax as executor, with instructions that the house be sold upon my death, and the proceeds split equally between a scholarship fund at the University of Guelph in Carol's name and a trust for Emma, held until Emma turned 25, managed by an independent trustee, inaccessible to her parents. The second decision was to update my power of attorney documents. I had 2, one for property, one for personal care. Amber had been named in both. I replaced her in both with Bernard, who agreed immediately when I called him that evening. The third decision was harder. I picked up the phone and called my daughter. She answered on the second ring. She sounded slightly out of breath, like she'd just come in from somewhere. I told her I'd received her letter. She said, "Good, Dad. I know it's a lot to process, but we really do think." I said, "I'm not going to be moving to Innisfil." She stopped. "I'm not selling my house," I said. "I'm not entering a retirement facility. I'm 67 years old and I am healthy and I am capable of managing my own life. I appreciate that you're concerned, but what you sent me was not concern. What you sent me was a plan for how to manage my estate while I'm still using it." There was a long silence. Then she said, "That's not fair." "The letter had been reviewed by a lawyer," I said, "before you'd had a single conversation with me." Another silence. And then her voice shifted, that old sharpness coming back. And she said, "We have a family to think about, Dad. We can't be running up to Barry every time something happens." "Nothing has happened," I said. "I'm fine." "You're 67. Your grandfather lived to 89, I said, "and he shoveled his own driveway until he was 84. She told me I was being stubborn. I told her I was being clear. We said goodbye without resolving anything, and I sat in my kitchen for a while after, listening to the furnace hum and watching the light change on the backyard. I want to be honest about what those weeks were like, because I don't think it serves anyone to make this into something cleaner than it was. There were nights I questioned myself. I thought about whether I was being too rigid, whether there was some version of their concern that was genuine, whether I had misread the letter somehow. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said. Carol had a way of seeing the real thing underneath the stated thing. And I think she would have looked at that letter and said, "Kenneth, someone is scared about money. And it isn't you." That helped, thinking about what she would have said. I also thought about Emma. She was 6 years old, and she had Carol's nose, and she had started losing her baby teeth. And every time I saw her, she showed me whatever she was currently obsessed with. Rocks, bugs, the planets, that month's favorite book. She didn't know any of this was happening. She just knew Grandpa came to visit, and sometimes brought maple walnut ice cream from the place on Dunlop Street. I wanted to protect that. I wanted to make sure that whatever happened between her parents and me, Emma would have something waiting for her. Something nobody could touch. The scholarship fund in Carol's name was something I'd been thinking about vaguely for years. Formalizing it felt right. I worked with the University of Guelph's advancement office through May and June, establishing the terms. Applicants had to be from Ontario, studying business or engineering, and preference would go to students who had experienced a significant loss in their family during their post-secondary years. I wrote that criteria myself. I knew exactly what it was for. My daughter called again in early May. Her husband was on the call this time. He did most of the talking, which I had not expected. He said they had spoken to a financial planner who had confirmed that their proposal was in everyone's best interest, including mine. I asked him which financial planner. He named a firm in Mississauga. I asked if this planner had seen my actual financial documents. He said they had worked from information that Amber had provided. I said, "So a financial planner in Mississauga gave advice about my retirement based on information my daughter gave them, without speaking to me or reviewing my accounts." He said, "We were trying to help." "I have a financial advisor," I said. "Her name is Louise, and her office is on Bayfield Street in Barrie, and she has reviewed my actual documents and confirmed that I am financially stable and do not require any intervention. If you'd like her number, I'm happy to give it to you." He didn't take the number. The call ended badly. There was an accusation that I was being selfish. There was a suggestion that I was in denial about my age. There was a moment, near the end, where my daughter said something about how much they had given up to be present in my life, which I found genuinely difficult to process, because what I remembered was driving 2 hours to Oakville and back every 2 weeks, and grocery bags and assembled furniture and a granddaughter I had held in the hospital before she was 6 hours old. I didn't say any of that. I said, "I love you. But this conversation is over." I hung up. June came. Bernard and I played 9 holes at a course outside of Collingwood on a Saturday when the weather finally decided to cooperate. On the way back, we stopped at a diner in Stayner and had the all-day breakfast and coffee. And I told him everything that had happened. He listened the way he always listened, thoroughly, without rushing to respond. And then he said, "You know what I think? I think you handled it like someone who knows who he is." I didn't say anything. I looked out the window at the highway. "Carol knew who you were too," he said. I took a sip of my coffee. "Yeah," I said, "she did." The summer was quieter than I expected. My daughter and I were not speaking, which was painful in a low-grade constant way. Like a toothache you learn to work around. I kept my routine. Morning walks, Wednesday curling, Saturday woodworking. I was building a blanket chest that summer, red oak, hand-cut dovetails at the corners, and I worked on it slowly and carefully because I wasn't in any hurry and because the slowness of it was part of what I liked. Emma's birthday was in August. She turned 7. I sent a card and a gift, a set of high-quality color pencils and a book about the solar system, because she'd gone through a planet phase that spring. I addressed the envelope to her directly. I did not include a note to her parents. I don't know if they let her open it. In September, my daughter called. It was a Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer, and then I did. She didn't mention the letter. She didn't mention Innisfil or the family trust or the financial planner in Mississauga. She said Emma had lost another tooth and had asked why Grandpa hadn't visited in a long time. I sat with that for a moment. "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her Grandpa was busy," she said. And then, quietly, "That wasn't a good answer." "No," I said, "it wasn't." There was a long pause. Outside, my neighbor was raking leaves. A wind had come up and was undoing the piles as fast as he made them, and he kept at it anyway, methodically, not surrendering. My daughter said, "I think we should talk. Not about the house or any of that. I just think we should talk." "I think so too," I said. She drove up to Barrie on a Wednesday in early October without her husband. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd read her letter 8 months earlier, and we drank tea and talked for 3 hours. Not about money, not about the letter, about her mother, about what it had been like for her when Carol died, 19 and away from home, trying to act like she was fine because she didn't want to be the kid who fell apart at university, about what it had been like for me in this house. The 2 years after, learning to be alone, I had not really known that she had carried those years so quietly. She hadn't known, either, how those years had settled into me. We didn't fix everything at the table that Wednesday. That would be too neat. She didn't apologize for the letter, not in so many words, though she said, "I think we went about that wrong." I told her I thought so too. I told her that if she was ever genuinely worried about me, about my health, my safety, my finances, she could come to me directly, sit at this table, ask me. I was her father, not a problem to be managed. She nodded. She was looking at the window, at the red and orange of the maple in the backyard that her mother had planted in 1998, and I think she was thinking about a lot of things at once. Before she left, I told her I had updated my will. I told her I had done it because I felt I needed to protect my own wishes, and also Emma's future, and also the memory of her mother. I told her the details, Carol's scholarship, Emma's trust, and I watched her face while I explained it. She didn't argue. She asked one question. "Is Emma taken care of?" "Yes," I said. "Emma is very taken care of." She left us before 5, before the highway traffic got bad. I stood on the front step and watched her car back out of the driveway, and then I went inside and stood in my kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular, just standing there in the house I had lived in for 31 years. The blanket chest was finished by November. Red oak, hand-cut dovetails. A smooth, flat lid with a small brass clasp. I put it at the foot of my bed, and sometimes in the evenings I sit on it to put my socks on, and I think about the fact that I made it with my own hands, in my own workshop, in my own house, and that nobody put me anywhere. And that Emma will have something when she's 25, something her parents can't reach, something with Carol's name on it in a different form. My daughter and I talk now, not every week, but often enough. She brought Emma up in December, and Emma ran inside and wrapped herself around my legs and told me all about a rock she'd found that had a fossil in it, an actual fossil, a tiny ancient shell pressed into gray stone. She had looked it up and she knew exactly what kind of creature it had been and how old it was, and I listened to every word. I made maple walnut ice cream, the good kind, not store-bought. Emma ate 2 bowls and her mother ate 1 and tried to pretend she hadn't enjoyed it as much as she did. I'm not naive. I know that what happened last March could happen again in some form. There will be a day when I am less capable than I am now, and decisions will have to be made. And I genuinely hope, that by then the way we talk to each other will be different. I hope she comes to me first. I hope she sits at the table. But I also know that I made sure that Emma has something waiting. I made sure that Carol's name will mean something to a student in Guelph who needed help getting through a hard year. I made sure that this house and the life inside it remained mine for as long as I am the one living it. Carol would have nodded at that. She would have said, "Good, Kenneth, that's exactly right." I think she would have poured herself a small glass of wine and looked out at that maple tree, and I think she would have been satisfied. So am I. I think about that maple tree in my backyard sometimes. Carol planted it in 1998, the year we repainted the back fence and argued for 2 weeks about the color. She won. She usually did. The tree is tall now, taller than the roofline, and in October it goes a deep red that you can see from the end of the street. It's still there because I'm still here. And I'm still here because I didn't sign anything I shouldn't have signed. There's something I've come to understand about how things unfold in a life, not in any mystical sense, but in the plain practical sense, that choices have consequences, and consequences have a logic to them. My daughter made a choice when she mailed that letter without calling me first. She chose efficiency over honesty, and a lawyer's language over her father's kitchen table. That choice had consequences she hadn't calculated, and when I sat in Venice's office and made 3 decisions of my own, those choices had consequences too, ones I had thought through carefully, ones I could stand behind. That's what I mean by doing the right thing even when it's hard. Not performing decency for an audience, but actually sitting with a difficult situation and asking yourself what's true and what's fair and what you can live with. I could have folded. I could have told myself that Amber meant well and signed the papers and moved to Innisfield and let the house go. Some people would call that keeping the peace. I would call it abandoning my own judgment, and I've learned, slowly, over 67 years, that abandoning your judgment to avoid conflict is not peace. It's just a postponed argument you'll have with yourself at 3 a.m. for the rest of your life. What steadied me through those months was something quieter than courage. It was clarity. I knew what I owned. I knew what I had built. I knew what I had built. I knew what I wanted Emma to have someday. And I knew what Carol's name deserved to mean in the world after she was gone. Knowing those things clearly, without flinching from them, was what let me make good decisions under pressure. Bernard used to say that the most dangerous thing a person can do is confuse being kind with being a pushover. He's right. Real kindness has a backbone in it. And then there's the matter of staying in the fight. Not the angry kind of fight. I wasn't angry, not really, not past the first few days. I mean the quiet kind of persistence. Getting up and doing the morning walk. Finishing the blanket chest. Calling the university. Showing up for my own life consistently, without drama, because that is what a person of 67 years has earned the right to do. That persistence is what made the difference. Not one dramatic moment. 31 years of a house. 2 kilometers every morning. Dovetail joints cut by hand. When Emma sat at my kitchen table in December and told me about her fossil, a tiny ancient shell pressed into gray stone, millions of years old, I thought about how things endure. Not because they're loud, because they're real. I hope she remembers that someday. I hope the scholarship helps some student in Guelph get through a year that might otherwise have broken them. I hope Amber and I keep finding our way back to that kitchen table. And I hope if you're sitting with something heavy right now, you trust your own judgment a little more than you think you're allowed to.